Okay, order. The time is 1:56 p.m. We will continue on Resolution E14 and E30. We will be moving with 39 minutes left with the NDP caucus, and I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And hello again, Minister. I'm just going to jump right in because when we were talking yesterday, we talked about how you wore a number of hats based on the departments that are under the umbrella of justice. So I have a question about why the government has cut funding to hundreds of community programs across Nova Scotia. And can the Minister explain why the programs serving vulnerable communities were among the first to be eliminated?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Justice.
Well, as the member knows, Nova Scotia's government and the province of Nova Scotia is facing difficult times. We had a $1.2 billion deficit this year. We had a $1.2 billion deficit last year, and that's unsustainable. So we had to make difficult decisions. Each department was tasked with looking within their departments to try to come up with reductions and efficiencies. The departments that I lead were no different. Ministers worked with staff to try to develop something that we thought would have the least impact, particularly on frontline services. But the focus of what we're doing is providing good funding to all our core government activities. So that's why you've seen this year an improvement to the budget for healthcare, improvement to the budget in education, public works, opportunities in social development, where I used to serve as minister, received a significant budget increase. Those budgets go to things like improved healthcare for all Nova Scotians from one end of the province to the other. In education in particular, over $100 million. Primarily, a lot of that money goes for the school lunch program. Over 9 million lunches have now been served because of the school lunch program. And at a time when we're facing an affordability crisis, I want you to think about a single mom with 3 children. The 3 children are going on the bus to school every day, and now they can go there and have usually breakfast for learning. There's breakfast available for students in almost every school in Nova Scotia, if not every school, and a free lunch program offered in almost every school in Nova Scotia, particularly those from elementary through junior high. That's a huge burden lifted off needy families in this province. So the budget for that type of program is there. We have worked very hard in opportunities in social development, for example, to try to remove as many homeless people off the streets as we can. If you look around Halifax, you see the impacts of some of those investments. In terms of health care, you've seen increasing budgets so that we can provide more accessibility to health services from across the province. So we are trying to provide money to the core government activities, and where we have made reductions, it is targeted to things that we think we can continue to support in other ways, and also things we think we can work in the future to try to make sure that those particular communities are helped. So this is a cross-government effort. I know in departments across government, they worked very hard. These are tough decisions, but they're decisions ministers would have supervised, scrutinized. I know I did, and stand behind the decision we made in our departments, I think, as all ministers do.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question is, if the minister believes that the system is working, because clearly you had to make some cuts, but that these cuts that are happening aren't going to make the huge impacts that people in society are talking about. They're going to make the ones that are on the ground doing the work, the frontline folks that are doing this work, because, they were difficult decisions. And the deficit that I want to remind folks is a deficit that this government has created by spending out of budget and spending without any oversight. I would like to think that maybe before we had spent so much money on a number of things that we would have been thinking about what we would have to cut later. And I don't think that was taken into account. I know that there have been many discussions and reminders about what could have been done. And I can say, from my perspective, there's been lots of conversations on how we could have not spent outside of the budget to be in this specific situation. But I understand there are difficult decisions. There's difficult decisions to be made. And I mean, with the example of, the single mother with 3 children getting on a bus that now she'll have to pay for, because unless she's on social assistance, she will not actually have access to a free bus transit, thanks to this government. And then as well, when we talk about efficiencies, we're also talking about people's lives and their livelihoods when it comes down to, now they will not be an employee of some sort because, these budget cuts are going to affect their employment status. So, when the minister is speaking about the least impacts, they made decisions where they're saying they made the least impacts. I mean, based on the last few days, I think folks from across the province have said these are not minimized impacts. These are going to be detrimental. They are going to be harmful for decades to come. And so, when we talk about vulnerable communities, the minister should know, because, the minister is also the minister of the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism. This should be top priority for us to not make changes to programs and services that are servicing our most vulnerable communities and marginalized communities. And the minister did speak of that last evening. So I'm really actually surprised in the direction that we're going in today. When I asked, can you explain why, programs serving vulnerable communities were among the first to be eliminated? Because when we think about the cuts and who they're going to affect, it is those vulnerable communities. It's the disability community. It's the African Nova Scotian community. It's the marginalized community. It's the, I could go on and on and on, and that's not the point here, because the minister should know, based on the fact that these would have ran through their department, all of these cuts and budget changes and decisions would have ran through the minister's department to have a view so that they could have looked at it and actually made some viable decisions and spoke up and advocated for the rights of the people that they're going to affect, because that's the role of the Office of Anti-Racism and Equity, is to make sure that we're governing in the proper way with respect to these communities that have been on the margins and have been vulnerable for quite some time. I'm just really surprised to hear that, we're talking about difficult decisions and we're not actually realizing that these difficult decisions are going to affect these communities. And so when we talked yesterday, I get the minister is responsible for these decisions that are being made and takes responsibility for that, and I respect that. I also don't understand, and I think this is really interesting because, I've had an evening to think about this. I don't quite understand how no one in this government, with the guidance of folks that are viewing things under an Afrocentric lens, viewing things under a disabled lens, viewing things under an anti-racist lens, like all of these lenses that are apparent and that are supposed to be happening through the strategies that are within these departments, cannot see that this is not a good decision, that these cuts are actually very wrong. And it's actually like, it's not a good look for this government to make cuts that are looking like other places that are making cuts in the similar ways to our Black folks, to our Indigenous folks, to our museums, to our history, to all of these things. It's like the same playbook, and I'm concerned, and I'm concerned for Nova Scotians, and I'm concerned that we have departments that are going to look people in the face and say, you know what? Sorry, you've had this program here for 50 years because you never, ever had these opportunities. And we, as government, for 50 years said, this is important to us because you are a priority. And then we say, you know what? Our budget is just so we are in such a huge deficit because it's our fault, but we want to put it on you. And that's what's happening. So once again, my question is, to the minister, how does he think that this is going to impact vulnerable communities that he's supposed to be protecting as the justice minister, as the minister of the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism, as the minister of the Treasury, or as a part of the Treasury Board, as a part of all of these things that you have your hand in? How is this going to impact vulnerable communities in Nova Scotia? And I would really like to hear, an answer, because Nova Scotians are asking, they're wondering why these things are happening without any type of communication, without any type of, knowledge, finding out the day the budget was placed upon the table in legislature. Like, the respect level of what has happened has gone down the drain. And we need to be building up these trust levels with these communities, especially after years and decades and centuries of disrespect and centuries of complete disregard for people in our province and in our communities. And so I'm asking respectfully, Minister, how do you think that these decisions that are being made with your advice and your insight, how are they going to impact communities?
Thank you. We'll wait for the minister to answer. I recognize the Honourable Minister for Justice.
Well, I want to thank the member for the question. I also want to say I respect her passion and her commitment to all groups across Nova Scotia. There was a lot in that. Before she asked the final question, I'm just going to take a moment to talk about some of the approaches we had to take to try to deal with a very challenging fiscal situation in the province. First of all, she said that the deficit we face now, and correct me if I'm wrong when it comes back, was primarily caused by some additional appropriations that were spent over the last several years. Well, those appropriations are things we determined that we needed to support specifics, particularly in healthcare. Sometimes it would go to settlements with labor unions, particularly in the areas of healthcare, OSD, and others. Things that came up during the year that we needed to fund for the betterment of programs and people. One would be things like the school lunch program, other things like that we had to do. So when you have additional appropriations, understand that money is going to support average, everyday Nova Scotians in needed programs. When you look at what all provinces are facing across the country right now, every province that's put forward a budget so far has put forward almost record deficits. British Columbia, a $13 billion deficit budget. Think about that. That's for 5.7 million people. That would be the equivalent of us putting forward, I think, about a $2.2, $2.3 billion budget per capita. That's unsustainable for Nova Scotia. Think what that would do to our debt servicing costs. Think what that could do to our credit rating. That's what BC is facing. Alberta has put forward a $9 billion deficit budget. Now, that may change now because of the sharp rise in oil prices because of the war, but that was the budget they had to put forward. That's Alberta, with all their economic power, with all the oil and other natural resources, with their big agricultural industry they have going out there. They're facing a record budget. And per capita, I think that would be like over $1.5 billion. So, a budget per capita that's larger than we're facing in Nova Scotia. New Brunswick's come down with a massive budget. For just under 1 million people, it's over $1 billion. Per capita, again, more than Nova Scotia's. That's not making excuses. We're responsible as a government. We're the ones putting forward that deficit budget. But I'm going to tell you that the economic fiscal challenges that all Canadians are facing now, and we'll see what the federal government brings forward in the fall. I expect it's going to be a pretty difficult budget as well. We are facing unprecedented, challenging times. In my own background as a politician, I was elected shortly after the economic crisis of 2008. We ran a huge deficits during that time because we had to spend money to keep the economy of Canada going. And then we had to return a surplus. So we had to make tough decisions at that time federally, when I was a federal MP, to get us back to a balanced budget. And how did we do that? Well, there's basically three ways you can balance the budget. The first is to raise taxes. And we heard people protesting yesterday, to raise taxes, to bring back the HST. I'm not saying anyone did that in particular. I'm saying that we heard that at that protest. Raising taxes right now upon Nova Scotians is the wrong way to go, in my opinion. The reason is the biggest issue we're facing right now across Canada, across Nova Scotia, is affordability. If you look at any poll, if you talk to people on the street, if people come in your constituency office, affordability is the biggest crisis they're facing. We understand that. We get that. Raising taxes only increases the pressure on families, the pressure on Nova Scotians, the pressure on seniors who are on fixed incomes to make the ability to pay their bills more difficult. So raising taxes would do nothing but throw gasoline on the fire of the affordability crisis. That would be the wrong way to go. It's a simple way. You just say, we'll raise the HST 2 points and we'll get that millions of dollars and we'll be able to fund everything. But what that would do to the average everyday citizen in Nova Scotia would be so detrimental and put more pressure when we can't do that to them. So that would be the wrong way to go. And the second way that we're not going to do would be to just simply cut education, cut health care, reduce expenses on those core government programs, not slow down the construction of a new hospital. And Nova Scotia, when we were first elected in 2021, healthcare was the #1 issue in the province. And basically this government was first elected on healthcare, on accessibility, making sure that there were more doctors, more healthcare providers in the province. And look at the steps the government has taken to do that. There's a new medical school with students in it in Cape Breton. There is nurse practitioners who've had their scope expanded so they can provide more services. Almost all the services that a general practitioner, they can check people in the hospitals, they can discharge people from hospitals, they can prescribe. The scope of nurse practitioners has helped us take pressure off our doctors so that they can see people that are diagnosed with severe healthcare issues like cancer, like Parkinson's and other things. Meanwhile, nurse practitioners who have excellent ability, excellent training, can take some of the heat off the doctors. Those are some of the investments this government made. Pharmacists have had their scope expanded. So pharmacists can now do a lot of things you would first have to see a doctor to do. Now you can go to your local pharmacy and get those services. So there's been a lot of changes made in the healthcare system to make it more accessible, more open for people to get services, and that all took investment. And those investments, we managed to bring in surplus budgets for years in a row, but when they first came in, they were deficit budgets. And we had revenue that would increase, so we were able to bring in surpluses. We had some off-the-books appropriations because we had the money to do it. We had money coming in to actually invest in Nova Scotians and invest in some of these priorities that we all know they have. But that's changed. Right? We've had changes to the immigration program, and we've had pressure because of the government of the United States, and it's the most protectionist government we've ever seen in the United States of America, at least in my lifetime. And that's having an effect on all provinces, including Nova Scotia. We've seen other protectionist activities from China, for example, in our seafood industry. We now have some of those tariffs that have been reduced, but that affected our economy. That affected our revenues. So we're facing unprecedented challenges in terms of the revenues the province is able to gain, which has put pressure on our fiscal envelope to invest. So the choice we did make was first, look at some of the spending we're doing on grants and programs. Now, these are tough decisions. But I can tell you, we took those decisions seriously. They were heavily scrutinized. And a lot of these grants are not eliminated. Programs haven't been eliminated. Most of them are reductions. It could be 20% or 30%. Some are more. But every one of those was scrutinized. And as a government, as a minister, I know I take responsibility for the reductions in my portfolios. As a member of Treasury Board, I can tell you, we went through line by line and looked at what what can we do to try to make sure we keep key programs in place, and also keep the reductions small enough so that those programs can continue to be administered and help people. So these are tough decisions. There was a lot of scrutiny put on them. I wanted to know that every single one of those programs across government was scrutinized heavily. And it's not something we want to do, but it's something any responsible government would have to do. And those were how those choices were made. In terms of marginalized communities, people with disabilities, and other groups that are the most needy in society, that was forefront in our minds. That's why you've seen things like in OSD, their budget has increased. As the former minister of that department, additional budgets for the remedy, for example, as we move people with disabilities from institutions out into community. There's a budget to continue to support that work. It's very important work. That's going to change the lives for future generations. And in terms of the remedy and the amount of money, I think it's over $100 million more that was invested this year, about $130 million last year. That's going to move people that had never had a choice of anywhere to live except in an institution, many of them for their entire lives, or the bulk of their lives. No choice of where they lived, no choice in how they lived, no choice in what community they had to reside in. For the first time, many of those people are going to have an opportunity to make those decisions for themselves. Budgets will be allocated to them. They have input of where they're going to live, who they're going to live with, how they're going to live, and that's a huge change. And we've seen this in the past too. Like we used to have children in orphanages in Nova Scotia. That was a system we had all across North America. And now they're in community through a robust foster home system, which we also support. So that's a huge difference. The foster system shows much better outcomes than the orphanage programs ever did, and the abuse and stuff that happened in the past is something we can now avoid. So when I talk about the remedy, the investments we've made there, would anybody want to go back now to an orphanage program and not go for the foster system? I don't think anybody would agree with that anywhere in the legislature or across the province. So these were reductions of programs that were tough, but I can tell you they were heavily scrutinized, and every single one of them, and we know they hurt, every single one of them had great consideration in it. So we stand behind them. We think we've presented a budget that funds the programs to the vast extent. If our revenues do change, some of these things could be reconsidered. And if there's any damages that are above and beyond what we anticipated, that's something we'll continue to work with community, work with these organizations, and we're prepared to talk, continue to collaborate, and if there is damage done beyond what we would have expected, that's something we'll have to discuss with them and we'll consider at a later time. So I'll leave it with that and answer your next question.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would respectfully like to leave some time for the minister to do his resolution. So if the minister is prepared to do that, I am open to giving the minister the time to do that.
We're prepared.
I recognize the honourable minister for Justice.
Madam Chair, we're prepared to take more questions.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like I said last evening, I was very satisfied, and I knew that I could have a conversation outside of here about some of my concerns. I really am disappointed that we would not be calling the resolution right now, as that was the plan as of last evening, and here we are doing it in this form, in this manner. I'm just pretty disappointed in the way that this process is going. So I am finished with my questioning, and if I have others, I will ask another time.
With the NDP caucus finishing their questions, we will move to the PC caucus. I just need a second because your constituency is really long. Just a second. I recognize the honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Minister for being here today to answer some questions. I'd like to talk about the police review. Just wondering if you could provide an update on the status of the police review and any findings or next steps moving forward. Thank you.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the member for his question. As a result of one of the recommendations of the Mass Casualty Commission, which we may talk about later, Nova Scotia embarked on a police review. And currently in Nova Scotia, the system is, we have 11 different police agencies, one of which is the RCMP. The RCMP cover about 80% of the geography of Nova Scotia, but we have 10 municipal agencies as well. And they all operate independently. They all operate, they're all trained police officers, but there's less coordination, and that's something that came out through the Mass Casualty Commission. So the department started the police review by listening, by calling in many, many stakeholders. So there were over 6,900 Nova Scotians who gave their thoughts and feedback on policing services in their communities. The number of participants highlights that policing is incredibly important and deeply affects the lives of all Nova Scotians. Now, some of the key insights from consultation include visibility, equitable police services, consistent civilian oversight, consistent information sharing, and the costs of policing. So first, let's talk about visibility. Nova Scotians want police service to be visible in their communities. This is something that we heard through the consultations. We've also heard from our municipal leaders as we travel around the province and met with them. We talked to municipal leaders in small communities that said on Saturday night we have teenagers speeding in their community. That's one of the biggest problems they have. Some people living in urban areas might scoff at that, but your biggest problem, Madam Chair, is always your biggest problem. And police services need to be visible to take on things in communities because the communities are the ones paying for the police service. So aside from responding to calls, communities want police to be seen in neighborhoods, at community events, patrolling in vehicles, patrolling by foot, interacting with the public, and making those personal connections. That's something Nova Scotians value. Nova Scotians called for police participation in these community events, and some participants described experiences of discrimination or stereotyping in their interactions with police. That's one of the reasons we need to make sure that police are trained to reach out to marginalized and underserved communities as well. We also heard that Nova Scotians want more equitable police service delivery, specifically that access to police and policing services should not vary depending on where you live. So rural communities sometimes see the police service less. Sometimes the police service has to cover huge swaths of geography, and they may not always be close by when you need them. That's something that was heard loudly when the Mass Casualty Commission was doing their hearings. Communities want more consistent and meaningful civilian oversight of police. So we have different systems from around the province with different standards and different participation rates. One of the things we heard is that can no longer go on. We need consistent and effective civilian oversight of the way the police operate. Also, we need to hear local priorities from those communities. Another issue that was brought to the attention of the people doing the consultation was that Nova Scotians and system partners told us that we need to ensure that agencies are technologically supported to communicate with each other effectively, and the current barriers to data have made policing more difficult across Nova Scotia. Technology is improving, and we need to improve and use the technologies that's now available to us, which wasn't available to us before. And we also heard from Nova Scotians, municipalities, and system partners that the cost of policing is becoming more and more challenging. Now, there were other things brought, but those were consistent things we heard from across the province. In response to that, there were some outcomes that we're looking for. Deloitte was the company that conducted this consultation process, and they made a report and made recommendations. You can see it. It's posted online for anybody watching from home. Deloitte's recommendations outline a path forward that will ensure policing in Nova Scotia is consistent, responsive, community-focused, and equipped to meet the evolving needs of our province. The report recommends the implementation of foundational changes and the expansion of a provincial police service. The recommendations outline a path forward that will ensure policing in Nova Scotia is consistent, responsive, community-focused, and equipped to meet the evolving needs of our province. Deloitte's report recommends the implementation of foundational changes and the expansion of the provincial police service to any municipalities who are not able to meet these requirements. So there are 6 foundational changes that Deloitte has recommended. The first is a unified records management system. A single records management system that will be used by all police services in Nova Scotia is one of the first recommendations that Deloitte put forward, and one that the province will be embracing this year. You will find a budget line in this budget which provides the funds necessary to align this. Currently, in Nova Scotia, there are 3 different records management systems being used by different police agencies. This can no longer be the way forward because they do not talk to each other. So I'm going to pick one challenge we're facing in terms of the modernization of criminal elements in the province. Shoplifting is something we're all familiar with. We understand what shoplifting is. You know, you might have a child go into a store and steal a chocolate bar, shoplifting. We might have someone that's down on their luck go in and steal some food, shoplifting. But retail theft is a growing issue, particularly in Halifax, but throughout the province. But what we're actually seeing is organized criminal elements, organized crime, actually taking shoplifting to the next level, where they do this in a coordinated effort. So the organized crime factions will encourage and grab people that are down on their luck to go in, and they give them a list of things they want them to steal.
Order. Sorry, can we do this through me? Sorry. Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to consider the 4 hours finished for today.
Do we have unanimous consent? That would conclude the questions for today. Would the minister like to end with a statement? Sorry, this through me. Yep, thank you. Thanks. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Madam Chair, so I have 2 options, I guess, to read my final statement or just to go directly to my resolution. What is the will of the committee?
There are 2 options on the floor. I would like to know what the will of the committee is. Would you like a second to confer? I recognize the Honourable Member for Inverness.
Yes, we'll just like the resolution, please.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I was so looking forward to answering questions from my colleagues for the rest of the afternoon, but in lieu of that, I guess we'll move directly to my resolution. E14, it is resolved that a sum not exceeding $536,436,000 be granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect of the Department of Justice pursuant to the estimate. E21, resolved that a sum not exceeding $1.452 million be granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Review Office pursuant to the estimate. E23, resolved that a sum not exceeding $3,309,000 be granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect of the Human Rights Commission pursuant to the estimate. E27, resolved that a sum not exceeding $632,000 be granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect of the Nova Scotia Police Complaints Commissioner pursuant to the estimate. E30, resolved that a sum not exceeding $4,716,000 be granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect of the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism pursuant to the estimate. E36, resolved that a sum not exceeding $38,877,000 be granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect of the Public Prosecution Service pursuant to the estimates. So that is my resolution, Madam Chair.
Shall the resolutions stand? The resolutions are stood. I would like to thank the Minister for his time today and the staff for coming out and making sure that he was prepared. Thank you for all the work that you do. We will now take a recess. Do I? Order. Order. I would like to adjourn this meeting. This meeting is adjourned.